Hello there, guys. My name's Jack Heritage. I'm a practical karate instructor from the Cotswolds.
And I'm Pat Woodward, amateur enthusiast in a number of different martial arts styles.
And welcome to the Armchair Combatives podcast.
Nice to have you, Jack. Nice to get this together. So, I think the first conversation we need to have, the title of this episode is going to be Sports versus Practicality. A big reason I wanted to have this conversation with you, obviously this is why I want to start this podcast with you, is because I've been training with you now for getting on 4 years.
Yep.
And you have a very unique approach. Now, this isn't me kind of blowing smoke up you or anything, but it's more, I will freely admit that for a number of years, training things that I have practiced varying styles of Filipino martial arts, Panantukan, Thai boxing, Muay Thai, Wing Chun, that kind of thing. I've gone through a lot of different martial arts.
Cool.
I'm a bit of a cherry picker. I will freely admit that. I had a really bad opinion of karate for a number of years, and seeing the way that you like to teach, which is much more practice and practicality versus the sports side of things, I'll freely admit I was really wrong. So, on the back of that, then, how would you describe your approach to teaching karate?
So, it's probably a good idea if I go into the background of what I started with and what I do now, just because that kind of gives you an idea of why I do it. So I started off in a very sport-based club. Sport maybe actually being a bit of a loose term for it. It was more of a fitness-based karate club. We'd learn a lot of things like kicking, striking, all of that kind of stuff. We did a lot of kata, a hell of a lot of fitness. So I was incredibly fit throughout my kind of years from 7 onwards. But we never really competed. We did sport type karate without actually doing the sport of it, which was a bit of a strange one. However, we'd spar in club and what have you. And it was only when I kind of got older I started to look at the application stuff to the katas, and people were talking about the self protection side of things, and I was like, I want to kind of look into that. What does that mean? What does that look like? And then after kind of discovering the right people, speaking to the right people, training with the right people, I kind of realized there was a lot more to karate than I originally thought myself. And because of that, when I started teaching myself, I wanted to really hone in on the practical side, the stuff that applies more to real life self-protection and close quarters fighting. And the more I tried to make it fit that, the more that karate actually just turned out this is actually what it was the whole time, with kind of the sports stuff evolving from that over the years into the 1940s and what have you. But yeah, I think that the approach that we go for is just more so, does this stuff work outside of we have shook hands, we've bowed, we're agreeing to this fighting rule set? Do these things apply to people that aren't trained in karate?
I think that's definitely kind of hit the nail on the head there. I will say for so many years, you see these kind of videos of and I'm gonna really shit on all of these keyboard warriors, because I do see see these videos and it's like karate doesn't work, and you see these two guys and they've got this big puffy rock'em sock'em robot head guards on, and they got the gloves, and they got their low guards, they're bouncing up and down, and they'll dive in and they'll get one little tap on the stomach, and it's like, hey! And that's the you've won the point. And out of context, it looks really dumb. But you have to understand, but obviously, once you put it into the context of these guys are sport karateka, these guys are point-based karateka, they come from the sport side of things. That gets a lot easier to understand. You mentioned the fact that you mentioned kind of the 1940s. Would you care to explain kind of the metamorphosis that karate underwent? Because I know you have a very good understanding of how it went from this kind of niche little Okinawan martial art that was rough and tumble and grappling on the beach to the sort of the white suits and the sport karate that we see today.
Of course. I'm only going to do a very quick overview of this. By no means am I a martial art historian, but yeah, it when we look at the history of karate, it started out in China. Actually, a lot of the styles were Chinese. It was generally kung fu that came to Okinawa, which is an island off the coast of Japan, where karate was actually kind of made and born. And the kung fu elements kind of got mixed with the Ryukyuan kind of martial arts, like the Okinawa martial arts. So, the grappling arts they had, the striking arts they had, and it kind of metamorphosized into what was known as karate. Obviously, it didn't actually get called karate until it decided to move to Japan. That was because they just wanted to spread karate to a bigger audience. The Japanese liked it, so they were like, "Hey, why don't we kind of have this over here?" And that was taken over by people like Gichin Funakoshi and get my words out, Kenwa Mabuni. And they popularized it. Obviously, when they popularized it, though, they were kind of trying to target a Japanese audience, not an Okinawan audience. They couldn't stick with the kung fu roots because the Japanese at the time did not like the Chinese, so they had to change it from
I wonder
like
why.
what was yeah exactly yeah what was known as tode, Chinese hand. They had to change it to empty hand karate. So that's why it kind of changed in that regard. But then they also stole things from judo. They were like, hey, we really like these guys like gis and belts and stuff. Let's just take that and we'll use that. And because judo was becoming a sport and they were trying to appeal to the younger audience, trying to get them ready for military conscription, so they were trying to make fit young individuals, they didn't really care as much about the wrestling side of things, the practicality side of things, the things that were like necessarily fit for real life combat. They were more like, we want to get these guys in lines, shutting up, listening to what we're telling them to do, making them fit, healthy young individuals. And then because of that, they weren't really teaching the old things that were taught in Okinawa, and those things just over time just slowly got lost. And then the sport side of it and the competitive side of it just kind of took over. Um, and and that's why we find like a lot of like kata and stuff. It gets misinterpreted because it gets it's basically like that they'll go, right, here's a kata. We've taught you the kata. We haven't taught you any of the real applications that were the original kind of like purpose of it. And you guys have only ever learned the sport of it. But we know there's supposed to be applications, so you guys just figure it out. And when they're just left to their own devices, they're like, okay, so the karate that I was taught was all from long distance fighting. I'm throwing kicks at head height. Therefore, I need to make my kata fit the fighting that I do. So it's really difficult. It's almost like you've got a builder and you've given him like electrician tools, and you're trying to get him to use those tools to build a wall. It's like
Mm,
you might be able to make something look similar to a wall, but it's not going to be a wall,
whether
and
it's
it's not going to be
actually
the
a
original
wall.
purpose of what you're trying to do. So that's kind of like where karate changed. It became something totally different, and that's not a bad thing. Just to be very very clear, it's not a bad thing. Like during that time, we ended up getting some better quality kicks. We ended up understanding long range distancing a lot better. Our footwork would have become a lot better as well from that kind of long range. However, it came at the expense of losing all the other stuff. And that's the only thing that's a shame of karate. If they would have kept everything throughout the entire thing, we'd probably be in a much more progressive place now. Obviously, we had to do a lot of backtracking, regressing, looking back at like, okay, where do we find the original stuff? Like, what was originally trying to be taught? And then obviously, you've got people trying to figure that stuff out. Yeah.
I think you make a really good point about kind of the militaristic side of things.
Sure.
And I think it's really important to understand that like a lot of different martial arts that we're experiencing that same thing. There's a really good book by a guy called Chris Murray that's called Crippled Immortals, and it's about his experience of training with Kim Tong, who was a Five Ancestors Fist instructor, which is kind of a very, very well put together form of Shaolin Kung Fu. And he talks about kind of Kin's experience with the military. And basically, this guy was taken from this kind of piss tiny village in the middle of nowhere, basically told, you're supposed to be the best martial arts instructor in what was at the time, I think it would have been 1930s China or 1940s China. And we need you to teach our soldiers how to be the best of the best. And Kim Tong taught them 4 moves with the saber, and that was it. And I think it's very much a case of you can boil down the synthesis of a martial art into a handful of moves. Like take boxing for example, you could apply a good jab, a good cross, and a good hook to basically every self defense scenario. In short, I would argue.
Sure.
Um,
Yeah.
but I think it's also a point to understand that you know people always rag on Tai Chi. Oh, Tai Chi is for old ladies in the park. Tai Chi is in its own right a martial art. There is Tai Chi Chuan, which is the actual application of Tai Chi. But the reason it's that the reason it's this kind of nice, slow formula to divide is yes, it's good for the joints, yes, it's good for the muscles. But I remember having a conversation with somebody once, and he was kind of going like, "You should come and learn Krav Maga because that's really about doing damage to
Yeah.
people. You
Yeah.
don't want to be wasting your time with this flouncy dance from China." And I didn't explain it to him at the time simply because I don't think he would have listened to me. But it's very much a case of you have to understand that it was a very turbulent time, the last century. I mean, I don't really need to state that too powerfully. Everybody who's ever opened a history textbook knows that. But martial arts was banned in China for the better part of half a century.
Absolutely.
Things
Yeah.
like the military was a big focus on a lot of countries' minds. There was a metamorphosis away from we don't need the old man on the mountain mentality anymore. We want to produce young, confident, strong men who can throw a punch. And that you saw that everywhere. You saw that in the UK, in America, in
Yep.
Japan, in China, everywhere in the world. That very much came about. So, what would you say is, I don't know, is there a moment where you were practicing a sport karate or a more widely taught form of karate and you went, this isn't for me. I know there's more to what I'm doing than what I'm being taught. And
I'd love.
this is the moment where I need to go out and, as you say, find people who have a similar viewpoint to me, who know these applications, who know about the wrestling, about the grappling, about the bunkai application of so much of these katas that I'm being taught. What was that moment for you?
So it's really interesting. I'd love to tell you it was like some sort of like it came to me in a dream. It's really
Calm
nothing
down,
that
Ushiba.
exciting. Like yeah, exactly right. It was honestly just a kind of a culmination of a few different people in my life and a few different things that I was seeing. So one of those guys was a guy that I used to train with. He used to come to the club that I trained at, and he had come from a more practical background. However, like he liked our club because it was a really great community, and I'm assuming he felt relatively welcome there, and he just made good friends with everybody, and he had an opportunity to get sweat on, get training, get moving, hit some bags and stuff like that. But he could see that I was really into karate and I really liked it. And I think because of that, he gave me a little bit more attention in that way and said, "Hey, here's some other things that I learned." So he was like, "Hey, this is some of the application we like for Pinan knee down or whatever it might be." And I was like, "Oh, that's really cool. I never thought about that. I never knew that was even a thing because my group didn't teach that." So it was almost like somebody was going, "Hey, here's another side to karate for you. You should start exploring this." And it was only like drip feeding me little bits of information. I wasn't like training with him or anything like that. And because of that, it started making me like more interested in actually looking for what else was out there. So then it kind of like spiraled into YouTube, which I kind of came across people like Jesse Enkamp, who I think does an absolutely brilliant job at spreading the different ways in which karate can be practiced. He's done pretty much all of it. Like he's done the sport side of it, he's done the practical side of it, he's done the self protection side of it. Like he's got a wealth of knowledge, and because of that, he shared all that knowledge on his YouTube channel, which made it really easy for me to kind of pick and choose the things that I was like, oh, that's really interesting. That's something I didn't think about. Oh, that's something I'd like to try. And through him, I ended up finding people like Ian Abernethy and various other kind of like instructors that have really interesting insights. And then from there, it was like, actually going in person and meeting some of these people and training with them. And, from that, I started kind of going, oh, God, this stuff's really cool. I really like this. This makes sense to me. Like, it finally made all of the things that I'd been training for the however long of my life and went, oh, okay, that's why we do that. Okay, that's why we do that movement in that position, in that angle. Okay, that makes sense to me now. Like before, it was like there was a big separation, and Ian talks about this. He's like he describes it as like 3K karate, which is like kata, kumite, and kion, and it's like never the three shall meet. They're all separate disciplines. And I really like that. It's because that's a lot of like how karate was taught. It was basically like you do kata, but you do kata to get good at kata. You do kumite to get good at kumite. You do kion to get good at kion. And I think somewhere in there you need to figure out what the relationship between the three are. And these people that I talk about, they showed me what that relationship was. And I think that it made karate feel like a complete system to me then, opposed to like a separate free systems. It was kind of like, okay, so we're doing the kion, so you get really good at striking hard. Okay, you want to know how to hit things really hard. Okay, your kata, okay, now you've got those movements. We're showing you different angles and different stance positionings so that you have good muscle memory. So that if we apply this on a person, you're able to actually use it on a person. So that's, and it's always from close quarters range. Like that's what kata's built for, is close quarters range, right? And then your kumite is like, hey, look, you're going to wrestle with that person. You're going to use all these techniques and try and hit them. And ideally, because you've already done the first two things, you've got muscle memory, you've got good striking ability. Hey, this should be a lot easier now. Instead of it being like that separate thing. So yeah, that's kind of like how I got there, at least. I think it was a really interesting thing because I'm glad I've experienced both, because I feel like it gives me a little bit more um, unbiased opinion, if you see what I mean, about karate in general. Because I'm not just like, practical is the only way to go. Everybody else is wrong. I've seen what the other people do, and I see how well it can affect and how much it can do for other people, if you know what I mean.
I do completely. Just on a clarifying point, very
Okay.
quickly before we move on, could you just give your best textbook descriptions of what the translations of kata, kion, and kumite are, just for those of us who don't necessarily practice a Japanese sport?
Absolutely. So yeah, so Kion is where we usually start. So Kion is what we usually describe as like fundamentals. So fundamentals, this could be learning how to do a front kick, a jab, a cross, a hook punch, uppercut, knees, roundhouse kicks, all of that kind of stuff. But it's usually practiced either in the traditional way, in lines. You line up, you face the front. They say ich, knee, sun, all that kind of stuff. And they're shouting at you to do these movements. I would also argue that fundamentals are actually more it's more telling you about drilling. So, when you look at other martial arts and how they practice techniques, they often practice it with a partner from the offset. It'd be like you're going to practice a roundhouse kick targeting a person, which I think karate missed for a long time, but that's a separate conversation. So, yeah, so that's all of your, like, any way in which you're practicing a technique and not applying it live. So it could be bag work, could be in line, or it could be with a partner without resistance. So, Kion. Kata is putting a number of those movements into a sequence. The sequence often has um, a flow to it, so it could be like this movement moves into this movement. If the person's head moves there, you hit them from there. If their head moves there, you can do this. You can throw them from this position. If that doesn't work, here's your other solution. And the kata kind of maps it out for you. But once again, it's a solo form. It's teaching you a little bit of footwork. It's teaching you stance. I think is probably the most important thing. Muscle memory for stance. Obviously, stance on its own, it looks pretty, it looks good, but kata, it just shows you weight shift. It teaches you how to move your body so that when you're applying it with somebody, you're able to create unbalance, you're able to put power into your shots, etc. And then kumite translates as sparring. It's your ability to like fight another person. So you're applying it now live. It's no longer under the construct of like a drill of going, this is the exact thing you've got to do. You're free to play around with it and find what works and practice the things you want to get better at.
Might not be, everyone might not be fluent in Japanese. We're not going to hold that against
No, not at all.
them. So I think you make a really valid point there of the karate that certainly I would associate with kind of modern karate, and the karate that you would see in 50 to 80% of schools do seem to focus on this kind of this triangle, but it's a triangle with no connecting lines. It's very much, you wouldn't, you learn how to do all of your techniques on the open air, you practice your kata on the open air, and then you start sparring. And I be honest, I found that a really backwards approach, because initially, I've done the majority of my training would be in, as I said, in things like Filipino martial arts and Muay Thai. I've obviously been doing, well, saying that, I'm not sure how true that is anymore than that. I've been training with you for 4 years, but I think that's one of the curses of practicing so many different styles over the course of 10, 12 years. I think there was so immediately a focus on, right, you're going to get into pairs. Somebody's going to put on the leg pads, the body pads, the arm guards, and you're going to practice this kick on the pads, practice this punch on the pads, practice this elbow on the pads. but it was very much always an understanding of you are hitting a person and you are trying to hit them in these places with this strike.
Yeah.
Whereas so much of, like you say, the standing lines, and even as far as the kumite that was kind of just the two-person drills that I initially saw from sport karate was very much like
Yeah.
these emotions that you have to figure out where they go. It's very much, unless the instructor is switched on enough to be like, this strike needs to be on this part of the center line because you're aiming for the stomach. This strike
Yeah.
needs to be on this part of the line because you're aiming for the head. You need to be on this angle because you're trying to get round a strike and punch here. If those things aren't explained, you might as well be doing Zumba, you know, because
Yeah.
all you're doing is getting fit, and that's
And
not a bad thing in the world. I sit here at a sterling 100 kilos, knowing that I could be doing a lot more to get my, I could be in the gym every day. Unfortunately, I have a job, but it's one of those where there's nothing wrong, as you say, with having fitness, karate for sport, karate for the control of your body that you glean from doing katas. I think it's
absolutely.
one of those things where like people will gravitate towards certain things. I know there's a gentleman in your club, our club. Not sure what the best one to put it would be, but there's a gentleman currently training with me and you, who
Yeah.
has absolutely flawless katas, absolutely flawless. And I know he also is interested in doing more of a sparring based thing on a more consistent basis. And to your credit, when he's come to you with those concerns, I say concerns, when he's come to you with those thoughts, you very freely said, well, we're not a sparring club, but I know that there's sparring clubs in this neck of the woods. If you can get there, they'll definitely accept you and you'll definitely be able to get a bit more done. So I think that's also something
Yeah.
to your credit of you don't seem to have this kind of one and only mentality that can be seen in facets of every martial art. I
Yeah.
would argue. I see so many people online who are like, "Oh, I only practice kickboxing because it's the best part of two great
Oh
martial
yeah.
arts."
Yeah.
Dial down. I only practice Brazilian jiu-jitsu because if you can take somebody to the floor, then you can do this. And it's kind of, I don't fully
Yeah.
disagree with those statements, but
No.
my personal viewpoint, and it's the reason why I've done so much in such a space of time, is because I don't believe that any one person has the answer, and
No. Definitely not.
your willingness, conscious or otherwise, to kind of say, actually, no, I'm not going to be doing 100% of what this student wants from me, so I'm going to point him in this direction
Well, yeah.
because
This is
yeah.
exactly it.
So yeah, it was very much a case of, without having an ego about it. One of the reasons why I wanted to make this one of our first conversations is because your unique approach is just that, because you are not afraid and you're not sour about saying to people, well, if you don't feel like what I'm doing is completely right for you, I do know people who would be happy to, who do practice, who are completely
Sure.
sparring based clubs, who are completely kata based clubs. And you don't say that in a way that's like, "We'll go off and train with them then if you don't like the absolute gem that I'm crafting here." It's more a case of, you like this, go and do this. You want to do that, you go and do
Yeah.
that. I'm not going to hold you back. Your
I think that
understanding,
makes
your
for a
yeah,
healthy environment, though. It makes for a healthy environment for your students. Like you can't gatekeep what you do because it's not going to be for everybody.
no,
Um, it's like one of the things. I think like you said, like this one student that might have looked for more sparring. Like we spar, we do spar, but our sparring isn't. It's not with the goal of like sport based karate, like traditional sport based karate, like you said, where you jump up, hit, bring the hand back to the hip, shout. That's not what we do. We're not bouncing on the spot and then banging, jump in, straight out, point sparring. That's not what we do. We're more continuous sparring. We're getting to a stage. Obviously, the club's evolving still, but we're getting to a stage where we're grappling more. We're allowing groundwork within the sparring. It's just slowly building throughout time. Obviously, we've gone through that metamorphosis ourselves as a club to get to that stage where we do more of that stuff. We started out very much so in the sports space when we started, and then things kind of evolved. The more I was learning, the more I was kind of going, you know what, this is actually where I want to take the karate now. And because of that, we're at a stage now where we pretty much it's more like an MMA style sparring set, which isn't for everybody, like you say. But I wouldn't want to have anybody that comes to the club and goes, "Oh, okay, well, I've got to stick with you because you've told me this is the best thing that I can ever do." It's not fair on your students, and you're being dishonest with yourself as well. But like on top of that, like you mentioned earlier, like context of what you're doing is so important. And I think that's one of the things that a lot of clubs miss. They don't contextualize anything they do. You know, the big one for me, and I see it all the time, and it really, really gets under my skin, is um, people that say like we teach self defense or we teach self protection or whatever they call it, whatever wording they use in their marketing, and then you go to their class and they teach you like competitive sparring, and it's like, yes, you are not wrong. There are skills within that realm that will translate into self protection, but just because you can get somebody to do a head height roundhouse kick doesn't mean you're teaching them any form of looking after themselves. And I think that's one of the things that I actually pride ourselves on is I think we're very honest with what we do. And I think calling ourselves practical karate and using self protection and self defense in our marketing and the way that we describe the club, I think is actually appropriate because we do those things. We make sure that we don't just focus on the sport side of things. We focus on the build up to violence, in the de-escalation of it. We look at the avoidance skills, the escape skills, at the base level, your awareness skills. But then we also do bring in the practical side of things, like, okay, well, you haven't done all those other things, and now you've actually got to use a martial art. Um, so I think, like you say, it's like context is so important. I think a lot of people miss that. And because of that, you end up with people, jumping into martial arts for the first time. They go to a new club, and because they're not really told what they're doing, they just make assumptions that what I'm doing is good for self defense because I'm punching and kicking. And I think that's actually quite dangerous. And you see that in low level clubs, and you see that in high level clubs too. Like people that, like, MMA fighters that look at it from the point of view of like, I can fight, therefore I know I know what I'm doing in self protection. So okay, but sure, but if I jump straight onto somebody mid fight, get them in mount, and then ground and pound them, you're going to end up in some massive legal issues after the fact. So it's like, okay, yeah, you might be good at fighting, but you're not good at self protection, if you see what I mean.
Oh, completely. And I think you had a really good definition with the difference between self protection and self defense, in the sense of self protection is very much your awareness of the situation, your ability to de escalate, your ability to escape, your understanding of witness awareness, legal awareness, all of these facets. And self defense is actually just the techniques themselves that you would use should all of those prior attributes fail you. And
Yes.
I think it's very. I personally just kind of I can't help but find it a little bit funny because I was going over some stuff with some friends of mine. They reached out to me. They both work in charity work, and they are seeing quite a dangerous rise in. They kind of put it as very much a rise in the mentality, especially among young men. You've got all of this "your body, my choice" crap going on in America, which is not
Yeah.
necessarily to rag on Americans. I'm just relaying information that I've been given. Um, and they very much reached out to me like we would feel better having some self protection training.
Absolutely.
And I was kind of looking into, specifically what is self defense for, what is self defense for women comparative to men. For context, I'm over 6 foot. As I've stated, I'm 100 kilos. I'm bigger and broader than most people, most men, regardless. And it's very much techniques that I would be able to pull off someone who's 5'5" and maybe 80 pounds is going to struggle with. And I kind of looked into this whole what is, specifically what are some recommended things for women's self protection, and it's one of those things where I see like some of these videos are just like they are really wishy washy. Some of them made me
Yeah.
laugh because it's like, oh, are you being threatened by an assailant? Immediately tear out his eyes, and it's like, whoa, like
Yeah, for
you
sure.
can't be going from 0 to 100, and you can't be teaching people that way. But it was one of those things where in the end, I just fell back on what I know, what we've done with you, and it's much more of an awareness based thing and
Yeah.
understanding that self protection isn't, oh, you're feeling threatened, immediately spring into action, immediately take this guy out. Not to say
No.
that you will never encounter a situation like that, but it's one of those where, again, it's clubs who consciously or not are specializing in one particular thing, and they're not providing any context. Something that
Yes.
I have found, especially with you at CKS, Cotswold Karate School for the listeners, is you have a real good way of getting context into everything we're doing. This,
Sure.
this drill is contextualized to this. This training exercise is registrant to this. When we are doing the kata, this is the context behind these strikes. When we're doing awareness drills, these are the context behind the awareness drills, because it's so important nowadays, almost because so few clubs actually put the context in.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I think it's than anything because I think it's actually more of instructional error not giving context. Even if you know the context as the instructor, you don't want to ever feel like you're just leading people on, without giving them the baseline information. Like it's all well and good. Like I could teach you how to do a perfect throw. I could teach you how to do some really, amazing strikes, whatever it might be. But if I'm not telling you what context you're learning that in, you are likely to apply it outside of the right context. We teach stuff that is technically sport-based karate. Like, we teach jumping scissor front kicks, or we do any form of jumping, spinning back kicks. Great fun to do, right? Absolutely love doing them. I'd like to think that we've spoke to the students enough so that they know that that is not the answer in a self-protection situation. Even if you tried to pull it off, you got to realize that is a very low level of working. Like it's actually probably too risky to even try it. You're better off doing the base skills, having a few things in your tool bag that work. I think one of the best ways I've had this described to me was from a guy called Jamie Clubb, but I'm sure some people will be familiar with him, who said that your self protection stuff is almost like a first aid course, in that it should be something that you kind of repeat every now and again, just to kind of get your brain into rejigging your memory of like what to do. So it could be as simple as like teaching things like the awareness drills, how to use the fence properly, so like setting boundaries with people, the basics of preemptive striking, and then everything else is the martial art. It's the stuff that comes after the fact of you've already failed, like you said, you failed at everything else, and now I'm actually having to use karate. Like
Mm.
I would say that self-protection and karate are not one in the same, but they're two parts of a bigger whole.
Completely. And I think we've obviously got, and we are very much fans of the quote, who you will have to remind me who it is from, but flow is the management of failure.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
I think you're completely correct to say you failed at your awareness. Something has failed either in the de-escalation stage, in being able to escape, and at this point you have no other option but to use your karate, your whatever you've got in your tool bag. When I have, as I said, going back to the Filipino martial arts, obviously that's a lot of knife and stick work. When I have taught knife defense, when I have taught the skills necessary in that, there is very much a disclaimer I put on every single one of the classes that is, I really hope you never have to use this, because something that, if something that I think people don't seem to understand is, being a karate black belt or a Muay Thai crew or a master of Wing Chun or whatever it is, doesn't take your chances of survival from 10% to 100%. It takes it from 10 to 50. It takes it from 10 to 80 or whatever it is, in a just a straight up fist fight on the street, because people don't fight fair on the streets. My Filipino martial arts instructor, a guy called Lucky Madaha over at Total Martial Arts in Coventry, he said to me once, so much of what goes on in people's heads when they're learning martial arts is they expect the other person to fight fair. They
Yeah,
expect it to be, I mean, it's come from, it's come from TV, it's come from movies, it's come from books and stuff like that. It's very much, if someone starts a fight with you on the street, you expect it to be a fair stand-up fight, just to see who's the better man. Sometimes, maybe that's what they want, but he also said, like, what if they, they start punching you? What if they start kicking you? What if they start calling their mates? What if they pull out a knife? What if they throw a brick at you? There's no martial art technique in the world that blocks a brick flying at your head at 30 miles an hour. Like, it's
Yeah.
what and I think it very much comes back to this kind of principle of context, and it very much
Yeah.
comes back to the understanding of there's so much you can do before you are forced to before you're forced to attack another person.
Absolutely.
It's not. I'm not. This isn't me kind of trying to bleed into the drippy hippie, I'm a pacifist bro vibe. Because I'm not. I've been doing martial arts for 12 years. I like to hit people for fun. That's just very much that's it on paper, unfortunately. But there is a real understanding of the people who know how to fight don't start fights. It's really just that simple.
It's
From everything
it's
I've
really
seen,
interesting you say that. It's really interesting because what I usually find as well is people that have done martial arts, especially ones that have included some form of sparring, some form of like physical training with it. Like you said, they are generally the type of people that don't want to start fights just because I think they have an appreciation for what violence is and how it feels to be on the other side of it. Like there's nothing worse than turning up to a sparring session. You get matched with a guy that's just like doesn't hold back. He's not very good at understanding that you're only a white belt. It's my first week. Please look after me. And he just goes hell for leather because he's trying to show off. And we've all sparred with somebody like that.
we've all met that guy
We've
on the
all met
mat,
that guy. Just
or on
don't
the street. We've all met that guy.
yeah, don't be that guy. That's the first thing. Don't be that guy. And it sucks to be on that side of violence. And if anything, like going to a martial arts school is a really good way of kind of like just humbling you. It's like, hey, so all this stuff that you thought you were really good at, you said, every guy thinks they can fight. Like it's just like it just is what it is. Actually, you realize no, I can't. As soon as I walked into that dojo or whatever it was, like Muay Thai gym, whatever it was, I've got the living shit kicked out of me for an hour, and that sucked. I don't want to be in violence. Violence sucks. I want to get better at this, but I certainly don't want to be doing this outside of the club too. Likewise, though, it builds a good confidence, I think, because if you're able to control your adrenaline in those heightened situations, when you're under pressure, you've got people that might be shouting at you, bringing up your adrenaline that way, shouting at you, pushing you, trying to hit you. If you've experienced that inside a dojo, it means that you're less likely to be completely taken off guard by it when it happens in real life. And I think that's why live training is so important with any form of practical martial art as well. You've got to do things live because drilling will only get you so far. So I think that's a really important thing to kind of like come back to. It's just that everything we do is trying to prepare you for any of those situations that you might come across. But one of the things that you said was to do with street fighting and people like they're not going to play fair. And I think you have to incorporate that into the way that you teach as well. Like you can't make assumptions about how people will fight or what people will do, but you can take a good idea that they're going to be violent, they're not going to care about your health or your safety, and they're not going to fight fair. If you just assume that they're not going to fight fair, you've already got a really good understanding of what people are going to be like outside of the rule set of like a sparring bout. And I think that's why it's really important that you teach principles over teaching techniques. Because if you've got an understanding of underlying principles that apply to like real application, real combat, you understand that so it doesn't really matter. So my job might be don't get hit, cover your head. You can cover the head in so many different ways, and you look at other martial arts, they all do it in a slightly different way. The principle though is generally put your arms up, cover your dome, and don't get hit. And it doesn't really matter how you do that, provided you put a tick in that box. Like I've covered my head. The next thing might be take control of the assailant. It could be grab them in some way. You could go for a plum clinch. You could go for a overhook, underhook. You can grab them in a load of different ways. The point is though, is like the principles are the same. And if you understand the principles, you're not then fighting with techniques. You're fighting with understanding.
Completely. So we are coming into the last 20 minutes of our hour. So the very big question then, the kind of crux of the argument, has the general public, in your opinion, got the wrong idea about karate?
Oh, okay. Right. That is a really loaded question. And okay, so I would say overall yes and no. So karate as it has been taught for the longest period of time now, so for the last 50, 60 years, I would say people probably have got a relatively good understanding of. Um, it's generally a lot of kids. It's generally. I'm not going to use the word McDojo because I know there is loads of really, really good karate clubs out there, and the only reason I say that is because McDojo for me is often it can also be just clubs that care more about the business and care less about the students actually getting better. So I think and Taekwondo often falls into that category sometimes too. I'm not saying all dojos are like that or dojangs, but I think karate, as it's been done for the last portion of history, especially like the majority of clubs, I think people have got like a relatively good understanding of, and it is generally kids. It's generally quite fast battle progression. It's not. It's rare to find clubs that teach self protection well. And I'd also say that it's is usually just based on sport. There's there's very little practicality to it. It's all very much so for the sparring rule set that they've instilled in that club, which is often point stop sparring. And there's nothing wrong with that. Let me just be very, very clear. I've got nothing wrong with sport karate. I think sport karate is great. I think it teaches a lot of really cool skills. I think you become incredibly fit from it as well. It's not personally what I want to do with the art anymore, but I would say, look, that is the most popular form of this form of karate. Therefore, people's opinions of it are probably right. However, where I would say they're also wrong is that there is another side to karate. It's just not as popular. It's gaining in popularity. I've noticed that in the last like 5, 6 years, especially. Like it seems to be getting more and more popular. What I would kind of describe as practical karate or applied karate. A lot of like the clubs that I'm um, familiar with, and people that I've trained with, they often use practicality or they use applied in their marketing and stuff. I think it's just totally different. It's just a totally different beast. Like we deal with all ranges of combat. We don't just deal with close. Sorry, the sport distancing. Also, like it's holistic. It's more holistic than you find with the kind of like the specified fighting style of like sport karate. We deal with the grappling range, we deal with a little bit of groundwork, we deal with forms of throwing and forms of like close quarters and long range striking. Like we kind of do a bit of all of that, which means, in my opinion, I think you become a more well-rounded martial artist. However, I would also then potentially argue that the way we do it, we don't get specifically mastery in any one of those areas, which some people might look at and go, okay, well, I want to be a master of kicking. So, okay, well, if you want to be a master of kicking, you need to go and train Taekwondo for 5 years or 6 years or whatever it might be. Whereas I think holistic styles are generally better for overall self-protection, and that's kind of like the goal of what I put into the karate that we do now. And I think that's what a lot of people don't know that karate is. And we've had a lot of people that have kind of joined the club, kids that have trained other karates, parents that bring their kids and they're like, oh well, like my little Timmy, he's like a green belt in the karate that we used to do, and I'm like, oh, what karate did you used to do? And it's 9 times out of 10 it's Shotokan, and it's like, cool, we don't do Shotokan karate. We're based on Wateroo. However, even that's like a bit of a lie. So we kind of do Wateroo, but we kind of do our own thing too. And you often find they'll be like, oh, can he start at a green belt in our style? And it's like, well, I don't know what he used to do. Did he come from a sport club? Because if he came from a sport club, our green belts are going to be a lot better at grappling than he is, based on the fact that he's probably never done it. So you can't really equate it, and I think that's the big thing, is like practical karate and sport karate are not one and the same. Like the katas might look pretty much the same, some of the kicks might look the same, but the way that we apply those things are not. And that's the biggest misunderstanding of what practical karate is that people have a view of what karate is and they'll apply sport karate to all karate. And that's just not what we do.
I think that is a very good way of putting it. I think it's really interesting that you've actually brought up the fact that obviously people will come into the club. I don't want to say it's just parents of their kids,
No,
because
it's not always, no.
it's everyone. I feel, people will say like, oh, so I was doing karate where I was living. I got up to, let's use the example of, I got up to green belt. I've moved down here. I wanted to find another karate club. can I come back in as a green belt? And it's kind of, I don't know, because I don't
Yeah.
know who you are. I don't know what you've done. I don't know how you spar. And I think something that was like really eye opening was going to previous karate clubs. There was an instance of you'd go and you do these grading sessions, and they're like basically an hour and 50 minutes of jumping on the spot with like 10 minutes of actually performing what you need for their gradings, for that grade in their system. And you just look, and you're kind of looking at it going like, hang on a minute, so you've got me working alongside your blue belts, your purple belts, your brown belts, and I'm executing everything they're executing. So kind of by your logic, am I a blue belt in your system? Am I a brown belt in your system? And I think it is very much, we have all been victim to a club that's like, if I can just get you grading consistently every 3 months and just keep bringing you up every 3 months, then that's an extra
Yeah.
20 quid, 30 quid, 40 quid in my pocket from you and everyone else in this room every 3 months, and that's a big win for me.
Sure.
Whereas when you decided to take the leap and you formed CKS and you put
Yeah.
your own syllabus into practice, I was astounded at kind of on paper how broad it is, but in practice how concise it was. Now, this isn't me blowing
Okay.
smoke
Yeah.
up you again, but it was
No,
very
no, no.
much.
That's me. I'm blushing over here, man. I'm.
But it's very much,
Yeah.
whereas like, you go to some places and it's like, okay, for your yellow belt you need these four combos, this kata, and we need to see that you can hit a bag enough to actually move it.
Sure.
That's, and as I said, that's 10 minutes of work, and you can make that as crisp as you want, you can spend as long as you want on it, but on paper it's 10 minutes of work to prove that you're ready to go to this next grade, and it feels like you're being a bit cheated. As an adult, as a kid, I'm
Yeah.
sure it's doing exactly what it's designed to do, which is go, oh, amazing, I just smashed my yellow belt grading, on to the next one. Whereas now coming into the CKS system, for the grading in these, for grading in these belts under you, you've got to demonstrate striking combos, kicking combos, grappling, groundwork, throws, bunkai, self protection. You've got to be able to demonstrate that you are a functional karateka, not just somebody who can execute four combos in a kata.
Yeah.
No, and I think that's very much why I wanted to make one of our first conversations. Has the general public got it wrong? Because my standpoint is no, they've just been given slightly false information, like you say, over the last sort of 50, 60 years. I mean, you take anything, like take your average martial arts movie, right? There's a Tony Jaa film called Warrior King. One of the main villains, quote unquote, is a karate guy. And they make pains of being like, this is a karate guy. He's a douchebag. And if you try and punch or kick him, he's going to knock you out. But as soon as Muay Thai brings in its magical elbow strikes, done.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's kind of like, and you take, take the most recent John Wick movie. Scott Adkins, really qualified karate guy, excellent actor, excellent stunt performer. But who is he? He's the villain. And as soon as John Wick takes him to the floor, he's done. And it's kind of,
Yeah.
it's very much, people have been fed in the same way that when you kind of bring it back to the sport thing, people are like, oh, I'll knock you out, mate. Because for so many years in the UK, in America, in other countries, boxing's been the prevalent thing on television. So you immediately subconsciously equate my strength, my prowess equals being able to knock somebody out, because that's what Muhammad Ali could do. That's what Mike Tyson could do. That's what Nate Diaz could do. That's what Conor McGregor could do. And these guys are the top of their field at the time. Disclaimer at the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
For sure.
no, like I will say, if any of those three men want to come to my door and fight me over that, then I will give you my address. It won't be a long fight, but at least I get to meet you before I die. That'll be nice. Um,
Yeah.
but no, and it's very much nowadays. Again, this was something I was talking about when I was training back in Coventry of 10 years ago. I mean, yes, still today, but kind of 10 years ago. If somebody started a fight, 99.9% of the time, you would hear oh, you fucking look at my missus again, and I'll bang you out, mate. I'll knock you out, mate. Because again, the boxing mentality. Now MMA is prevalent. You look at me like that again, I'll choke you out. Because
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
how they know. Oh, the best MMA fighters, they get the choke, they get the rear naked. They're the best,
yeah, sure.
and it's that kind of mentality.
It's all the perception. Yeah, it's all the
It's
perception of what they're seeing.
And I think the perception of what the general public has been seeing has been sport karate guys with their kind of, they dive in for the single shot, hey! And that's,
Yeah,
they're,
yeah,
they're the best. And you get so few people with an online presence because that's
yeah.
what it boils down to, I'd argue. It's an online presence. You have
Absolutely.
you have these great producers, content creators, and karateka like Jesse Enkamp, like Ian Abernethy. You have actors like Scott Adkins bringing karate to a wider audience. But the general perception, if you go onto YouTube right now and you Google karate, I guarantee the first 5 videos are going to be sport karate ones because that's
Absolutely.
what
Yeah,
because that's what
without a shadow of a doubt.
because that's what you see in the Olympics, in competitions, in sport events. That's what you see televised,
Yeah.
which means that's what you see online. And I think people look at karate, and unfortunately, there's kind of this two-sided coin of some people will look at that and go, "Oh, that looks really nice and active. That'll get me in shape. I'll do that." And some people will look at that
Yeah.
and they go, "Hang on a minute, that's it. One punch to the stomach and the fight's over. That's not how anything works. I'm not gonna bother with that."
Yeah.
And I think it's why, as you say, you are seeing a rise of people who are making real pains to go, we are an applied karate club. We are a practical karate club. We are a self protection
I
karate club.
I can totally understand why they've done it, and I think looking at it makes a lot of sense based on the change in the environment that we're in now, with like the internet, people being readily available to look at different forms of martial arts easily. And the biggest one for me, and I think I like kind of like make this kind of one of the final points, is once again coming back to context, right? It's you look at things like the UFC and you have people in there that they're holistic, right? All of the things they do, although they might specialize in karate, I guarantee every single one of them has a basis in grappling. Okay, this is me making an assumption that they're sport karateka, right? They will learn how to do a variety of different skills. They will learn how to do some groundwork, how to do some chokes and strangles from the ground, how to control positions. They will not just jump into the UFC using sports karate. If they do, I can already give you a really good idea of what's going to happen. Okay, I'm not going to tell you because I think you should be able to figure that out for yourself. But you get the idea, right? And I
Completely.
think contextually, you get people like, especially the keyboard warriors, and I'm sure we'll talk about this further in the future. But they'll say this doesn't work in a real fight. This doesn't work in thing. It's like, okay, yeah, I totally understand that. And sport karate would not work against a prime UFC fighter. Okay, because it's not designed to do that. And I think that's the most important thing to remember is the rule set of sport karate is not the same rule set as UFC fighting. It's not the same rule set as applied karate or practical karate. You get good at what you do, and you can't expect people to be good at something else, even though they do something that's similar. If you see what I mean.
No, I completely agree. Right, I think that's about the end of our hour. So,
Awesome.
would you just like to say for the viewers whereabouts they can find you and a little bit of information about the club?
Absolutely. So the club is called Cotswold Karate School. We're based, funnily enough, in the Cotswolds. We've got a few different clubs around Chipping Campden, Evesham, and I've got a kids club where I live in a small village. Aside from that, we're going to make sure that we promote the podcast on our website, which is called cotswoldkarateschool.com. So you're more than welcome to have a check out there and see what other things we're up to, what seminars we run, what celebrity guests we host, and all the other things we get up to.
Nice, nice. If you want to get a hold of us in any fashion personally, you can find me on Instagram at Good Medicine Martial Artist. Jack, can we find you on Instagram?
You can indeed. You can find me under Cotswold Karate School on Instagram as well.
Excellent. Thank you very much for listening, and we hope to catch you the next one.
Bye bye.